it was conceived with the idea, actually the noble idea, to accomplish two goals. One, to protect the consumer's health. The other is to eliminate completely international barriers to trade in food. And actually, I don't disagree with either of those goals. But in fact, what's happened is during the course of its, at this stage, 50-year existence, it has been hijacked by certain commercial interests and special interests that dovetail, and they can't act on this alone, with bureaucratic interests, government interests who love to control people and will control people at any instance. And what they do is they use this as an excuse. Well, we're being told by the commercial interests that the X, Y, and Z are a threat to the consumer's health. So we're going to let them in only at low levels, if at all. And so they act on that. So it sort of fits into the bureaucratic mindset of this toxicological model that they're applying to natural health products. But in effect, what they're doing is they're really harming consumers' health through this. What we hope to achieve today here at this event, at the Truth Agenda, is really to educate people and to make them more aware and to network with them, to get them involved, to have them join the NHF Ireland and get active, especially in this upcoming campaign with water fluoridation. But it also reaches beyond that. That's just our first step. And if, as I believe we will be, if and when we are successful, then that will just parlay itself into other campaigns that'll be just as successful as well. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for that welcome. As I've said many a time, I don't get this kind of a warm welcome at Codex meetings, I guarantee you. But what we do get is we get featured on their official video, which is the Codex Alimentarius official video. And in response to this, which actually isn't a bad piece of filmmaking, by the way, it's about 9 minutes long, we at the National Health Federation produced our own counter video, which we'll start off by showing you today. It's about 10 minutes long, so bear with us.
It's the stuff of science fiction, a future where society is collated, automated, and regimented, on a planet where everything we ingest, from water to medicinals to food, from farms to grocers' shelves, from cradle to grave, is determined by multinational corporations. Some would call this progress, a necessity in this technocratic world. Others dismiss this view as naive and see dark designs behind the machinations of a growing international bureaucracy, which they believe is overseeing a power grab by the wealthiest companies on the planet. Many reject these beliefs as one part conspiracy theory and one part lunatic fringe. But it is not a fantasy, not at all, and the angst is justified. A shadowy international body, Codex Alimentarius, sanctioned by the United Nations, is where the political and economic battles are being waged for the future of the food and medicine supply. It is there where multinational corporations have lined up in an attempt to influence international regulations, and where they hope to sign exclusive contracts to feed and care for the masses worldwide. In America, the FDA stated its intentions long ago. They intend to harmonize food and health care, along with big food and big pharma, at Codex.
If there's a higher corporate good to be served by breaking the law, by having the FDA work with the Codex and try and drag the U.S. into this nightmare, then they're all for it, and they're doing it.
They do so far away from the scrutiny of a disinterested media. Yet their power will be so far-reaching that it is almost unimaginable to us here in present days.
This would be like the ultimate reaching of government into our personal health lives, which would be unbelievable. And not even our government, some, bureaucratic, diffuse, multinational, secretive government.
If they succeed, healthcare, and indeed our lives will never be the same. The battle for personal sovereignty is being waged right now at Codex Alimentarius.
These FDA bureaucrats meeting on distant shores will support increasing internationalization and harmonization of our domestic legislation to the international legislation and international standards and guidelines that are being formulated by Codex and other international bodies. And the interesting thing is, if you look at the strategic plan for Codex Alimentarius Commission, it says these standards and guidelines are intended to be implemented both domestically and internationally.
In the war against Codex, few have understood its implications better than Scott Tipps, president of the National Health Federation. Early in the new century, Tipps applied to be accredited and recognized as an INGO, an international non-governmental organization, at Codex meetings. NHF, the world's oldest health freedom organization, was granted that status, and the power brokers at Codex have regretted it ever since.
You know, there's only one Codex Alimentarius in the world, and there's only one health freedom organization that represents the consumer. I believe that every generation has its own struggle against power brokers who want to control individual freedom. It's an issue of personal freedom versus the bureaucratic mind. And so the health freedom issue, to me, is a primary human rights issue.
NHF has been at the forefront of the battle for medical freedom of choice since the beginning, challenging the FDA and Congress at every turn to preserve the rights of consumers. If Codex rules are adopted worldwide, though, it will become virtually impossible to use dietary supplements therapeutically, because dosages will be too low, and synthetic ingredients would replace natural sources.
There has been a concerted effort to try and limit the amount of vitamins and minerals in dietary supplements for some time now. What they want are the recommended dietary allowances, which are simply the minimal amount to prevent deficiency diseases like rickets and beriberi and pellagra and scurvy. So if they can be successful, we would obviously not be able to achieve therapeutic doses or even prevent disease.
At each Codex meeting, NHF has been fighting the Commission's designs to create what they term safe upper limits on vitamins and minerals.
One of the questions that's asked is, why is there a movement to establish an upper limit on the dosages of dietary supplements, vitamins, and minerals? And we do ask that question because we're asking, where are the dead bodies? Where is the mortality? We went back and looked at the poison control data. Certainly no deaths in the last 8 years reported by the Poison Control Centers of America. So dietary supplements are the safest consumer products that we can find, and certainly they're being mischaracterized as somehow unsafe to the public, that the public needs to be on guard in taking dietary supplements. And I think this is just a mischaracterization that must be stopped.
Since no other group but the NHF has earned the right to speak out at the Codex meetings, no one else can combat the onerous bureaucratic mindset, and they do so on the record, every day, at home and at Codex meetings.
NHF is not only the leader in Codex, it is also the leader in federal issues at our Capitol. So they understand how our government is either representing us well in the international climate or not. We have to think of the human spirit and the human autonomy when we're making regulations. NHF is a national leader, and that's why they are the best spokesperson at Codex, because they understand what we need at home.
As we stare at a future where genetically altered crops and processed food are the norm, as we face the prospect of our health being hijacked by government bureaucrats who are in league with corporate power brokers, we need the real truth in order to act.
NHF is the only health freedom organization with the right to sit down at the Codex table. And this is a key difference. It's one thing to attend a Codex meeting. Anyone listening to this could attend a Codex meeting, but you don't have the right to make a difference there. You don't have the right to participate. You don't have the right to speak out on important issues. And that's what we can do at these meetings, is we can do all of that. We can speak out, we can interact, we can make a difference. And we do make a difference.
As a movement of people who demand more health freedoms, not less, we must insist that facts constitute the dialogue on health freedom issues. We need to know whom we can trust. We need integrity. These are the principles upon which the nation's first health freedom organization was built. 6 decades later, the National Health Federation stands tall in the states, at Codex, and wherever the fight for health freedom needs to be waged. Over the past half-century, many have come and gone, but the NHF is still the torchbearer for medical freedom of choice worldwide. They have been there for all of us. They have been our champions, and now, more than ever, they deserve your help.
What I wanted to do is talk to you. I don't know how many of you have been to one of my presentations before. If you'd let me know, that'd help me direct some of my presentation today. Okay, so not that many. Well, basically, what I wanted to say is that right now, today, a cure for cancer exists. And this cure is something that's been going on since 1991, 1992. A Japanese researcher in the United States named Dr. Yamamoto has come across a substance called GCMAF, and GCMAF is just a very small molecular substance that is injected in the human body, 1 nanogram, once weekly injections, because it has a half-life of 6.5 days, and he's never had a failure. Not one patient has failed to be cured by this. And it's relatively cheap. It only costs about $10,000. Well, that's a lot of money, but compared to chemotherapy, compared to radiation, compared to surgery, it's a basement bargain and very, very cheap. He's treated patients, not large numbers of patients, granted. It hasn't been studies of thousands of people, but 20 to 30 here and there because it is a research study. And he has cured every single one, especially breast cancer, prostate cancer, colon cancer, and the like. No side effects and no remission. And like I said, since this has been started since the 1990s, we're talking not just about yesterday, we're talking about for quite a period of time, 18, 19 years. Every person in this room, at least if you're healthy, has two immune systems. You have an innate immune system and you have an acquired immune system. The acquired comes from the antibodies that your body produces when it's been challenged by an infection or a vaccine. And it's less efficient than the other immune system you have, which is the innate immune system. That's the macrophage part of your immune system that goes around destroying on a daily basis cancer cells, viruses, bacteria, and the like. Here's a photo taken from actually a drug company photo, I think it's from Upjohn, showing a macrophage destroying a cancer cell. But the problem is that a cancer cell, and the reason they tend to be so dangerous and deadly, is cancer cells will exude this enzyme called nagalase. And the nagalase will inactivate that macrophage and keep it from destroying the cancer cell. So how does the GCMAF work? It works kind of like reinforcements coming from the Army. When you get that injection, you get a lot of this GCMAF. And keep in mind, MAF just stands for macrophage activating factor. And it allows your own immune system to overwhelm the cancer cells and destroy the cancer. It's a shame this is not generally available. It's still being studied. Unfortunately, Dr. Yamamoto thinks he'll become a billionaire off of it, so he's trying hard to patent it. But there is a small company in the Netherlands that is selling the product. I don't have the address handy right now, but if you leave me your name and address, email address, I can send it to you later when I retrieve it off of my emails, if any of you are interested. And the program we have today, and I decided it might be better to put a brief outline. We have conventional versus natural cures and medications, the scheme that's in effect to suppress natural cures, how Codex fits into that scheme, what the EU is doing about this. We'll just touch on that briefly. Vaccination dangers, and what you as an audience and as individuals can do to stop this. Just keep in mind throughout this whole process, and even beyond, that the conventional approach kills. These are US figures. Now in the US, on average, 800,000 deaths a year from doctors. And I'm talking about properly licensed, medically approved doctors, approved by their medical boards, and they're killing, in the US, 800,000 people day in, day out. And some of these people, of course, would die anyway, but a lot of them have had their deaths accelerated by this. Now, if you take 10% of this figure, that's what the Canadian death rate is. But in the US, it's about 800,000. From properly licensed drugs, and I'm not talking about illegal drugs, we have about another 100,000 a year who die. Actually, around 127,000, but I put it down a bit so I didn't seem to be overreaching. And then from foods, we have 5,000 deaths a year. So this is what we're looking at from all these properly licensed, conventional approaches to either medicine or just general nutrition. But natural products, and again, I'm talking about organic products, I'm talking about herbal products, I'm talking about vitamin and mineral supplements, are far, far safer than anything I just showed you. Far safer than the drugs, far safer than the doctors, far safer than even if one were to go horseback riding, to be around bees and be stung by bees. Very few deaths. And you heard Bill Sardi speaking, who's quite an expert on the subject. And actually for the last 5 or 6 years, there have been 0 deaths from vitamin mineral supplements within the US. And we're talking about billions of doses each and every year, year in, year out. And these are exceedingly safe products. Now, why do I tell you this? I tell you this because it puts in a framework exactly the mindset of the bureaucrats that we'll be discussing later. I want you to look at this chart, and again, as I always say, I don't expect you to read it. In fact, it's a little hard even for me to read it from here, but you can get a sense of the shape of the curve, and I'll share with you some of the wording that's here. Basically, at the top, it says the risk of dying relative to being killed on a Boeing 747 flight. That is, where is that? I think it's right here, is the Boeing 747 1.0. So that's the mean, that's the average. At the very top is your risk of dying being associated with acute medical care in a hospital. Right underneath that, the second longest bar is your risk of dying from smoking. And it goes on down. But the interesting thing are these three figures down at the bottom, right here. So the lowest one, if you can possibly imagine, is you're walking down a Dublin street, and lo and behold, out of the sky comes hurtling a meteorite, hits you on the head and kills you. That's your lowest risk practically on the planet of getting, of dying. And there are so many zeros there, I won't even try to repeat them. Then up here, the fourth from the bottom is your risk, and I'll skip over the other two for the moment just to keep you in suspense, but is your risk of dying from being hit by a lightning bolt. That's the fourth to lowest risk, right there. Your third to lowest risk is your risk of dying from being stung by a bee. So there's that. So guess what's right in between those two? Anyone know? Well, anyone who hasn't already heard me speak. That's from taking a vitamin or mineral supplement. Your risk of dying is a bit higher than being struck on the head by a meteorite, and it's definitely lower, a good deal lower, than being stung by a bee and dying from that bee sting. So keep this chart in mind as we go through the slides, and you'll realize that all this nonsense about protecting the consumer from natural products, especially vitamin mineral food supplements, is all a bunch of nonsense. They're spending billions and billions of euros to protect you from something that is as harmless as you can possibly imagine. In fact, far safer than the food you consumed at lunch today. And why is that? Why are they spending so much money? They claim it's about protecting the consumer, but it's really not. It's about suppressing the competition, in this case, natural therapies that work. I already mentioned to you about the GCMAF. There are also plenty of other natural products. Well, GCMAF has been tinkered with a bit, but look at ionic silver. Some of you have seen the product in the back, which has been generously donated to us as a fundraiser for this event. But ionic silver is known for killing up to 473 different types of viruses, bacteria, and other gram-negative pathogens. Selenium, same thing. If you get there are different forms of these nutrients, but selenium is exceedingly good for reducing your risk of contracting HIV. I put AIDS here, I really should have said HIV. And for contracting the flu. And if you already have it, it will help dampen down the effect of it on your body, on your system. Natural vitamin D, especially for those of you here in Ireland where you're at a high northern latitude, you really have a need to take natural vitamin D. And I'm not talking about D2, I'm talking about D3. There's a huge difference between the synthetic and the natural. The natural you can take high doses with minimal risk. The synthetic, you can't do that. Just to give you an example, I was visiting a friend a couple of years ago in the south of France, an older friend. Wasn't very hygienic. I stayed at his place. He was wanting to serve me cups of tea and, you know, meals and the like, and I thought it would be impolite to refuse, but he was obviously very sick with the flu. It was in February, I think, of 2008, 2009. In any event, I decided, well, my immune system's strong enough, I can take it. So I did, and but lo and behold, with my lower level of vitamin D at that time, I still hovered on the edge of being sick for about 5 days. I was kind of right there, and then finally the 5th day, I just felt really ill. So ill, like for the first time in decades, I couldn't even work. So I had this high-potency vitamin D I'd gotten from the States, and it's 50,000 international units. So it's like break the glass and pull this out in an emergency and take it. So I took that at 10:30 in the morning. By 1:30 in the afternoon, I was well. And I'd completely recovered except for a slight cough. But I had already established a slight baseline of 2,000 IUs a day, so maybe I only needed the one. If someone's starting from a 0 baseline, they'd probably need it over a period of many days. But the point being made is that what we're looking at is some natural substance that can be used therapeutically, but you aren't allowed to know about that. but this will protect you from the flu. This will protect you from viruses. Not 100%, nothing's guaranteed, but to a large extent. Magnesium, omega-3s for depression instead of Prozac and these other drugs that turn people into homicidal maniacs. Why not use magnesium, especially the citrate form that will take the edge off depression? You have resveratrol for longevity. You heard and saw Bill Sardi speak in our video. And Bill is an expert on resveratrol and has done a product of his own called Longevinex that I take. A little bit of a plug for him. I won't make a dime off it whether you take it or not. But for women in menopausal years and all men, it's an excellent product for extending lifespan. So I highly recommend it, called Longevinex. You can go to the website of the same name to find it. But what we're finding is with cancer, and what we know, not just what we're finding, is it's cut, poison, and burn. You know, it's surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy are the only permissible methods of treating cancer. The competition is banned using the government's coercive powers. You know, for instance, if you just had something like shopping at a grocery store, you go to Tesco, maybe you don't like Tesco, so you go to another shop instead, another store instead. You have a choice. But what a lot of these players are doing is they're heaping rules and regulations on the competition to take away that choice from you. And they do it, you know, Tesco can't, Tesco cannot force you to go into the store. You could go buy something else, you could grow it on your own. There are any number of things you could do. You could order it over the internet. But if they were to run to the government someday, as some of these drug companies have done, if they were to get laws enacted that just allowed Tesco to be the store that you would have to shop at, then you wouldn't have a choice. And that's essentially what's being done in natural remedies and with natural therapies and the like, where the drug companies who spend, in the US at least, my experience, $6 million a day lobbying the federal government and the federal agencies just to eliminate the competition. So they do it through government agencies, and these agencies are actually captured by these companies. You know, we all would like to think that our food agencies work for us. We'd like to think that they're working in the public interest, but the truth of the matter is none of them are. They really aren't. They have been captured, and it's been shown empirically and statistically over the years, and just by pure observation. They've been captured by the very industries they're meant to regulate. It's the nature of the beast. For you, what's your interest in the Food Authority here in Ireland? I mean, is it occupy even 1% of your attention? I doubt it, because you have so many other things in your life to do, in your lives to do. But for a drug company, it probably occupies 100% of their attention. So they're going to focus a lot of energy and effort in getting in there, because if their drug isn't approved for sale in Ireland or somewhere else, that goes to the bottom line. They're going to lose a lot of money in profits, if not actually even go out of business. So they tend to focus on that. They'll offer jobs to these bureaucrats to come work for them. They'll talk to them day in, day out. And before you know it, these bureaucrats are in love with them. The only way that we can get, I'll get to this in a minute, that we can get them to act in our interest is through intense public scrutiny and pressure, and that's it. And when the public does that and rises up on its hind legs, then you will see them acting in the public interest, but usually only for short periods of time. There's another way, though, that these players, the powers behind the throne, so to speak, operate, and that's through what Noam Chomsky has called manufactured consent. Basically what they do is in the press, especially the mass media in particular, they will put through articles like this. This was the April 2010 issue of Reader's Digest that came out last year in the States. And in this issue, it basically tried to, I don't think it accomplished it, but maybe to the typical layperson it would, demolish the idea that people should take vitamin supplements. Basically saying they're a waste of time, you just would, you know, pee them out and the like, all the benefits, and it was all wasted, you're just wasting money. But the interesting thing about it is that when they do this, and in this particular issue, of course, I turned that's the front cover, of course. I turned it over, and what was on the back? A huge ad for Prilosec, a drug. And throughout this publication, there are drug ads. So who do you think they're going to, whose interests will they cater to? They'll cater to the big drug advertisers. You don't see a lot of vitamin or mineral supplement companies advertising in this. And at the same time, they're trying to shape the public opinion to support the takeover of healthcare at the upper levels in government. And this is one way they do it. And they do it in a very financially profitable way for them. So truth number one, I would submit to you, is government agencies don't work for you. They work only for public interests. They're a tool for eliminating competition, not creating competition. And again, they'll only act in your interest through intense public pressure. That's it. And don't ever be fooled into thinking they're your friends. So we have this happening on national levels, national levels throughout the world, you know, in the US, in Ireland, at Brussels, at the EU. But why bother doing it at all these national levels if you can go to the international level and you can capture the big kahuna? And the big kahuna here would be Codex Alimentarius. It's an international body that was created in the early 1960s through the auspices of the Food and Agriculture Organization and the World Health Organization, and initially started out very, very innocently in the sense of it didn't have any enforcement powers of any sort. It wasn't enforced. It was just intended to harmonize and standardize international food regulations. And it was, how would I say, it was, the member countries were tied into it through binding treaties, such as the sanitary and phytosanitary agreements, such as the Technical Barriers to Trade Agreement, which Ireland has signed, which the EU has later taken up as well, which the US has signed, which Canada has signed. Some 99% of the world's population is represented at Codex meetings, at least in terms of the bureaucrats who are in the governments of those countries. So they want to capture the big one. And that's what I've noticed at a lot of these Codex meetings. You see Monsanto representatives, you see drug company representatives running around and pushing their interests at Codex meetings. So the process is that you have, at the top, you have the Codex Alimentarius Commission. It in turn has given birth to some 27, at this stage, some 27 different committees. Different ones from the Nutrition Committee, which has the improbably long acronym of CCNFSDU, the Codex Committee on Nutrition and Foods for Special Dietary Uses, down to the ones such as the Natural Mineral Waters Committee that's hosted by Switzerland, and so on. And these are the ones that are doing the work to generate these standards. And if anyone ever tells you there's just one standard, one Codex guideline, that's not the truth. There are hundreds of them out there on many different issues, and some have been passed and approved 20 years ago. Others probably won't be conceived of for 5 or 10 or 20 years. Others right now are in various states of a 1 to 8 step process of being approved and adopted by the Codex Commission and by the countries. I know this may be more detailed than you wish to hear, but at the same time it's important for you to understand how they work, because they don't do any voting at these meetings. It's all done by consensus. The chairman or the chairwoman will stand out here and look at the group, and the country delegates are represented by their equivalent of the FDA, from Albania here alphabetically through to Zimbabwe, and then behind them will be the international non-governmental organizations like the NHF. But most of those are very different from the NHF, because most of those INGOs are representing commercial interests. They're trade organizations like the International Dairy Federation or the World Sugar Research Organization or the like, and their interests are very narrow, very specific, and not tailored at all to health freedom. If I may say so, NHF is the only, well, I may, because it is the only health freedom organization that is actually there and can speak out at the meetings and can oppose the adoption of these standards and guidelines. Now, underneath the committees, there have begun to be, over the last several years, working groups that will actually do some of the laboring work, kind of like the grandchildren of the commission itself. They then report up to the committees, who kind of rubber stamp their work, and the committee's work in turn is rubber stamped by the commission. This is a picture, a photo of the FAO building in Rome. I took this in July 2009, and the Codex Alimentarius Commission meets in this building in a room that looks like, oh wait, we got the Codex attendees, which I kind of already told you about. So you have the national governments, you have the INGOs, international non-governmental organizations I already described. You will have the members of the press, and members of the public as well, but very few attend. But this is the room I wanted to show you. This is the inside of the FAO building, and this is a little bit non-representative because it's a smaller room for the some 250 delegates that usually show up. But at the podium at the front will be the chairwoman, in this case, the chairwoman of this Codex Alimentarius Commission, the staff around her, mostly some scientists, but mostly administrative staff. And then here in the audience will be the various member delegates from the countries. And on those delegations sometimes will be trade members. For instance, the first 2 years that I attended Codex meetings, I was on the US delegation, but you sit there like a bump on a log. You can't really say anything. You just can listen. That's one reason I went out. Well, I got kicked off the delegation basically for being too vocal, and that motivated me to then get actual accredited status for the National Health Federation, which then in turn was a blessing in disguise because it enabled me to speak out at the meetings, something that I couldn't have done before. This gentleman here, standing up in the white, looks like he has a mohawk, but he really doesn't, is Rolf Grossklaus, the old chairman, he's retired now, of the Codex Nutrition Committee, and my arch enemy during the big fights on the adoption of the vitamin mineral food supplement guidelines. He and I shared many a knockdown, drag-out fight. Many a time I wanted to thrash him to within an inch of his life, but I'd forgotten my measuring tape. So, he's actually, in retrospect, with the new chairwoman of the committee, I'm kind of looking back ruefully to the good old days. I wanted to let you know that actually I do think, and you may laugh at this, but I do think Codex is a noble concept. It has two main purposes. Its main purposes are actually quite good. Protect the health of the consumer and to eliminate international barriers to trade. But having said that, the implementation of Codex is far from not even perfect, but far from even minimal. You have a very elitist, top-down driven agenda by people who think they know more about health than you do. It's very anti-natural food supplements, very anti-natural food, any sort of natural remedies or therapies. It's very pro-drug. It's very anti-free market. They think everything should be controlled by a central bureaucracy. And maybe one of the most important things, it's creakingly slow to react to changes. You know, I mentioned before about this 8-step process to adopt the guidelines that will govern the food standards on different things. This can be a multi-year process. By the time they've adopted the guidelines, with the doubling time of human knowledge going up almost logarithmically, they're way behind schedule in terms of keeping up with that knowledge by the time it's actually finally adopted. And there was an instance of this when the Canadian delegate very sensibly wanted the Codex Committee to consider some more recent science, but because it hadn't been considered by the FAO and the WHO, it was hooted down. In fact, the NHF was the only one who supported the Canadian delegate's comment, because they prefer to use the FAO and the WHO's science through their expert consultations rather than to use more recent science that would be more healthy and more beneficial for people. So that's why I say it's based on junk science. It's, they use fancy terms. They'll use risk assessment, risk analysis, risk management. But again, it's a case of garbage in, garbage out. If you're putting garbage into the system, I don't care how good the risk assessment is or the risk analysis or the risk management, you're going to get garbage coming out. And most importantly, they apply to natural products this toxicological model, which should be applied only to synthetically created, man-made created nutrients or goods. And in this case, they're trying to apply it across the board to everything. And when they do that, they're actually hurting people, because by suppressing the natural remedies, by making them unavailable to you and I, then how many deaths are they causing? How many people die? And these expert consultations are one method that they do or utilize for accomplishing this. Whether it's knowingly or not, the effect is the same, because what you have is some of the people at the top, at the FAO and WHO, are cherry-picking the experts now. They've been doing this for about 10 years. It's supposed to be a very objective body for giving the science to the committee to then adopt the standards or decide what standards should be adopted. And instead, they cherry-pick, they determine at first what the end result will be for the study. They say, we want it to come out this way. And then they look around the world and they find just those experts who will support that end result. They select them for the expert consultation, and they've been doing this since 1999. And then they come out with their opinions, which then the committee in turn relies on to create the standards. The vitamin mineral food supplement guidelines that we fought tooth and nail back in 2003 through 2005 and 6. Keep in mind, these vitamin mineral guidelines are just in a framework form. They want to put in maximum upper permitted limits to just give you very low potency vitamins so that they will not be therapeutic by any means. For example, they think, at least the Germans think, and they're trying to push for this, that you should only have 15 milligrams of vitamin E. They think on vitamin C you should only have a maximum of 225 milligrams. And they go through, the list is amazing. Actually, this list is a little chewed up because I had a car fire in August where my car caught on fire and burned up a lot of documents, but this is one that survived, so it's a bit singed here. But in any event, they want to dumb down basically all the nutrients that would help you and help to keep you well, including the vitamin D. You have it with GM food labeling, where they don't want many of them, especially in the Western Hemispheric states. Now, in this case, the EU is on our side, and they're trying to get GM food labeling on all GM foods at the Codex level. And we've been working with the EU representative there to make sure that happens. But the US, Canada, Mexico, Costa Rica, Argentina, and it used to be Australia and New Zealand oppose us. Aspartame, aluminum, food additives, and the like, melamine, contaminants in foods. I'll discuss that more later. The problem we face is that those whom we think would really be allies of ours, that is, members of the trade industry, those who want to sell you the vitamin mineral supplements, most of the big companies have been bought out by the pharmaceutical companies, or they've sold out. And they actually support the Codex guidelines. They think that if it says science-based, that it's okay because it's science-based, so why not? But what we're facing more recently, and what we've just been battling since I last talked in Dublin in September 2009, and we had a great victory, is on the issue of nutrient reference values. And I want to give this to you as an example of where we did actually make a difference. As small and as minimal as we are at the Codex level compared to these country delegates and the like, the US, the EU, China, and the like, we actually blocked the adoption of some standards that would have lowered the nutrient reference values. Now, the nutrient reference values are just their name for recommended daily allowance. And during a break at a meeting in 2009, just a month or two after I'd last spoken here, I came across this document that they wanted to adopt, and in typical bureaucratic style, it has a long name: Proposed Draft Additional or Revised Nutrient Reference Values for Labeling Purposes in the Codex Guidelines on Nutrition Labeling. Boy, that put me to sleep almost just reading it. But inside it, and it's Annex 2 to a larger document, they had something very interesting. They had nutrient reference values that were reduced down. Like, for example, on vitamin C, 60 milligrams is what is the recommended daily allowance, or NRV now. But 60 milligrams is not even adequate. I mean, you go outside and you smoke a cigarette, you're going to destroy, on average, 60 milligrams of vitamin C. Well, if you're just taking 60, then you aren't getting anywhere. You aren't even treading water because of your other nutritional needs for vitamin C. So to say that 60% is 100% is misleading and untruthful information. So here are these bureaucrats trying to block what they say are misleading and untruthful information about natural therapies, but they themselves are promoting it to the public. And they wanted to lower, like I said, to 60 milligrams. They wanted to lower magnesium from 300 to 240. But, you know, for people out in this audience, you're here and a lot of you already know a lot about nutrition. You would know more than to look at a label and say, oh, it says 100%, okay, I can go do whatever I want. I'm getting all I need for the day. You would know already that 60 milligrams is not an adequate amount. But the average Joe and Sue out there who rely upon that information, they will be very badly misled. So when I saw this during the break, I was fit to be tied, and I went down, got back to the meeting, and it's a good thing I wasn't called on right away. This is where that meeting was held in Dusseldorf, Germany in November 2009. There's the meeting hall, another case of a really cramped meeting hall. And when you speak out, your image is projected on the screen, and then the document that's being worked on is projected to the side of that. Costa Rica spoke up first and said, oh, Mr. Chairman, to Rolf Grossklaus in this case, we think that the vitamin A content shouldn't be reduced from 800 micrograms down to 550. Thank you, sir, and sat down. Well, they might as well have not bothered speaking, because if you take that approach at these meetings, you just get steamrollered and you aren't listened to. So the next person to speak was me. What did that tell me? Well, they let all the country members speak first, then they'll let the INGOs speak. If I was the next, then no one else was going to say anything. It would have been approved for the next step. The chairman would have said, thank you, Costa Rica, next, boom, it goes on to the next step. And as it moves up the chain from step 1 to step 8, the ability to change the wording in the document gets more and more restrictive. So I was bound and determined to stop it. And I knew the chairman was very keen on having his committee look nice. So I started out by saying, Mr. Chairman, thank you, but these figures that are here will make our committee the laughingstock of the world. It will be a public relations nightmare, and they cannot go forward. These figures should be higher, not lower. And then I went through all the reasons, some of which I've given you, but many more than that. And for the next, I'd say 45 minutes to an hour, the argument swirled back and forth with basically me holding forth against Australia, Korea, some of these other delegates. Mercifully, because they carry a lot of weight at these meetings, the EU delegate and the US delegate kept silent. And that's because they wanted their own institutes of medicine and EFSA to have their data go in. So they stood by the sidelines while I duked it out with Australia and Korea and some other countries. Believe it or not, and bless their hearts, the Iraqi delegate, the only time I've seen him at a meeting, spoke up in our favor. I don't know why, but he did. And then at the very end, as it was tipped on the balance, the Indian delegate said, we support the comments of the National Health Federation, and this document needs to be held back. And the chairman at that point was ready to hold it back, and he said, boom, you know, kind of figurative gavel down on the table. were holding it back, and that was the end of it. We stopped it, and that was in 2009. Now, fast forward to just last November when we had the next meeting, because they're held annually. And this time it was held in Santiago, Chile. And at that meeting, I thought, oh boy, you know, success is never final, as Winston Churchill once said. So I thought it'd be a tougher battle, but we'd stopped the momentum enough that by that stage, the EU was arguing on our side, all sorts of member countries. I barely had to say anything. By the working group meeting, before the general meeting had started, we had stopped it, at least temporarily again. This time now it's been pushed over to the, unfortunately, to the FAO, WHO expert consultation, and I'm sure they'll ruin it with their own bad science, but at least it's been sidelined yet another year, giving us another time to stop this from going through. So you can see that there are differences that can be made. This is the document itself. I'm sorry, I probably should have advanced the slide so you could have seen it while I was talking. It may be hard to see, but right here you'll have the figures like for the vitamin A, vitamin C, all lowered. Very dangerously, they've increased the calcium level, but decreased magnesium, because it's much more important for you to have magnesium in your body than calcium. Most people have more than adequate levels of calcium, but very inadequate levels of magnesium. And without the magnesium, which is the traffic cop that tells the calcium where to go, the calcium will go into your soft tissue. It'll create wrinkles. It'll be in your arteries and cause blockages. Most of the blockages in people's arteries are calcification, not cholesterol. So without lower levels of magnesium, but higher levels of calcium, these people have an anti-health agenda you wouldn't believe. As they do with melamine. This is another committee, the Codex Committee on Contaminants in Food. At the last meeting held in Turkey, in Izmir, I was there arguing that this substance should have zero tolerance. Now, you don't have to be a food engineer to know, or a chemist to know, that this seems to have a lot of nitrogen in its molecular structure, doesn't it? A lot of nitrogen. What the Chinese were doing very cleverly is they were adding this in because it's dirt cheap. Melamine's dirt cheap. And some of you may even have melamine countertops, you know, that are mixed with formaldehyde and the like. But if you put it in pet food, then when, instead of using expensive protein, then when it gets tested, because they're just testing for nitrogen content, then it will show as if it's a high protein cat or dog food. And they were selling this. And it killed probably in North America and Canada, the US, about 100,000 cats and dogs before they finally clamped down on it. Basically criminal action. And then they also were adding it into infant baby formulas. Fortunately, the babies were a bit hardier. Fewer of them died, far fewer, but many of them became quite ill before this was stopped. So keep in mind, this is the substance that we're talking about here. So at the CCCF committee, we're talking about a man-made contaminant. It's not like arsenic or lead. It's not something that's naturally occurring in the environment that you have to allow trace levels to be there. It's impractical to eliminate it. It's carcinogenic, it's deadly, and our position at these meetings was there should be zero tolerance. It's being artificially added into the environment. If we're doing that, then we can stop it. That fell on deaf ears, basically. It was a lone wolf battle against the EU and against most other countries who were more than happy to see it go through. And the EU pushed through a 2.5 parts per million standard for adults. For babies, for 1.0. I don't want to bore you with all the details, but I made the argument there that if, because the EU argued, oh, as a practical matter, we can't keep it out of the food supply. Well, if you can keep it at 1.0 for infants, why not have it 1.0 for everyone instead of letting it bump up? And the EU representative wanted exemptions even to that. If you eat mushrooms grown in the EU, you're going to get even higher levels than the 2.5 parts per million. And the danger with melamine is they look at it basically as an isolated substance. Well, it won't harm you. But they don't take into account that you're also consuming in your daily life or ingesting, you know, polluted air. You're, you know, asbestos from the highway that blows up into your car and then you inhale that. Other toxins, you know, pesticides, herbicides, fluoride in your water, you name it, it's there. and they're cumulative and they're synergistic. So it's not just melamine that we're worried about, it's the whole slurry of toxicants that you're getting in your body. Ractopamine, the same thing. This is an issue that I argued at the Codex Alimentarius Commission last. I make myself very unpopular at these meetings, I have to tell you. That's why when I got a round of applause, it's sort of, like, mother's milk or something. But ractopamine, they add it to animal feed. I don't know how many of you are aware of this product, but they do it, it's a beta agonist, and they do it to promote leanness in animals. And this makes the animals less fatty, have less fatty meat and more muscle meat, and it makes the animals more valuable. It's when they take them to market. But there can't be a washout period to do this. Like with most drugs, before the animals are slaughtered, they give a period of about 2 to 3 weeks before the animal's slaughtered that they don't give them the drugs. With ractopamine, they keep giving it in the feed till the very last minute almost. But it's toxic both to animals and to humans, and it makes the animals have, especially the pigs, behavioral problems and turn psychotic and the like. And that's why it's banned in some 150 countries, including the EU, including even China. Yet, again, the US, Canada, Mexico, basically the Western Hemispheric states, including this time Brazil, love to sell the product, and they argue vociferously that there should be high levels allowed in our foods that we eat, and they're struggling for this at the Codex level. Now, the chairwoman is an American, and she has argued this was the photo I took at the last meeting in July in Geneva. She has argued that it should go forward, but she's tried to be neutral on the subject since she's the chairwoman, but it's very clear where her sympathies lie. And she and I got into knockdown, drag-out fights at that meeting as I pointed out that she was being basically sympathetic to it going forward. They put out, and this was mentioned in the video, but they put out a strategic plan every 5 years. And this is the most recent one, 2008, 2013. And for those people who say that Codex will never come to Ireland, or that Codex will never come to their own domestic regulation, I say that's wrong. Because right here in their, and it'd be tough for you to read it from where you sit, so I'll read it for you. In their strategic vision statement, the second sentence they say, to this end, the Commission will develop internationally agreed standards and related texts for use in domestic regulation and international trade in food, and then they go on and talk about all the scientific principles that they want to invoke. But the point being made is that we're talking about domestic regulation, that these will be enacted. And here are other instances throughout this same document where they mention domestic regulation and the use of Codex standards. The European Union is running, and I'll just mention this briefly because we don't have a lot of time, but the Food Safety Authority is issuing regulations that are already binding on all the member states. In this case, it's the Food Supplements Directive, and it matches in a very parallel way the Codex Vitamin Mineral Food Supplements Guideline that we fought at the Codex level. And unfortunately, that directive has already removed a lot of very beneficial products and suppressed a lot of claims, as they're doing currently with the Traditional Herbal Medicinal Products Directive to remove a lot of very beneficial herbs. Now, there's a lot of talk about how it's going to remove every traditional herbal medicinal that's not approved, but that's not entirely correct, because it just removes the products that make the claims. There will be many of these that will move into the supplement category where they can't make claims, and you won't know what to use them for unless you go to a licensed practitioner. The licensed practitioner can tell you, but the company that makes it will not be allowed to. Very bad for an informed consumer, very bad for health in general, but of course, again, eliminating the competition. Which brings me to the vaccinations, and I'll just touch on this briefly, but we're talking about substances that are useless, actually counterproductive, and actually dangerous. in situations. I want to show you how they're useless. Here are some charts. I'll show you a series of several charts. This is the whooping cough, pertussis. And you can see here from the chart that long before the vaccine was introduced that supposedly took care of this problem, the incidence of whooping cough was on general decline. It leveled out there, but basically well on decline because of increased sanitation measures that the countries were adopting in the Western world especially. That's why the whooping cough declined, not because of the vaccine, which basically came in at the tail end of what was going on, but because of improved hygiene. In this case, same thing with diphtheria. Oh, by the way, with the pertussis, since the vaccine has been introduced, one of the ways that it's actually counterproductive or even dangerous is that babies who are given the pertussis vaccine have a 7 times higher rate of sudden infant death than the non-vaccinated babies. So actually very dangerous. And similar problems with diphtheria vaccine, measles. We have vaccination here. Actually, there's a very high rate, well, in this case, about 2.5 to 3 times higher rate. Those who have been vaccinated with measles having inflammatory bowel disease or Crohn's disease or an ulcerative colitis. Again, you can see while in this case measles did bump up and down, it actually was well on its decline by the time the vaccine was introduced here in the late 60s. The other problem associated with being vaccinated for measles is it actually shifts the burden of occurrence of the illness, or at least the vaccine reaction, to an age range where they're more vulnerable, where the children, the infants are more vulnerable. Usually the infants will catch measles around 5 to 9 years of age, but with the vaccine they're finding it more occurring in infants where they're highly vulnerable to being affected by the measles vaccine. Scarlet fever, no vaccine, but look at the chart, still went down. And yet, you know, it's a situation where people think that a vaccine is making a difference. Vaccines really make very little difference. So protect yourself. Don't take the jab unless you absolutely have to, and even then give it 3 or 4 times of thought. Do take natural remedies and preventatives, such as the vitamin D that I mentioned to you, the selenium that's very antiviral, ionic silver, olive leaf extract is quite good, golden seal is excellent, raw garlic, if you just quickly consume after having minced up raw garlic, the kill zone rate in petri dishes of raw garlic is actually better than that of most antibiotics. But you have to eat it quickly before the allicin's half-life is gone. So truth number 2, and this is the point I want to make, and it seems like it may not be related, but it actually is. You have all this power accumulating, and some of the previous speakers have spoken on this far better than I ever will. All this power accumulating to a central state that's more removed from us. In the US, it takes the form of Washington, D.C. In Europe, it takes the form of Brussels. And what you really need to do to get more health freedom and more freedom, individual freedom in your life, is to decentralize government, diffuse the power, get it back to the level of the people, where when you're speaking to your representative, you can look them in the eye, him or her in the eye, and make your complaints known, and they can actually do something about it, instead of having remote rulers who will be very corrupt, less transparent, and will think that they're God, that just because they've been voted for, democratically or not, that they are God and can do anything they want. They can be like King Canute on the shores of England, commanding the tides to roll back. Well, they can't do that to natural laws, and we're seeing that more and more today as institutions fail, despite the best efforts of these type of madmen and women. They're trying to get us all collectively into a world government. And again, other speakers have shown this far better than I, but it's the absolute antithesis of decentralization. We need to get power back to a low level. You know, that was the beauty of the United States. When it was founded as a decentralized under a decentralized government. Most Americans up until recently were known by the state in which they resided. They were either Texans, they were New Yorkers, they were Vermonters, you name it, that's how they were known. Until the American Civil War in 1861, most Americans had absolutely no contact with the federal government unless they went down to the post office and mailed a letter. That was their contact with the federal government. Nowadays, because the natural tendency of government is to accumulate more and more power, and you'll see this increasingly with the EU, now it's been completely turned on its head. In Washington, D.C., all the reins of power are flowing from Washington, D.C., and the states are minimized. So what we're looking at is a situation where people are losing power, and there needs to be action taken to reverse that. So what can we do about this? Our philosophy at NHF is politicians don't see the light, they only feel the heat. So you've got to get out there and educate yourself, and I commend each and every one of you for being here today, because you're educating yourself in a way that you'll never get from the Irish Times or whatever papers you read, or the television or whatnot. You saw the program last night, perhaps, on the Late Late Show, where the people who sandbag the people who hold our views, such as Christopher Monckton and Jim Core, had far more time to speak than the people who were at the podium to speak, up on the stage to speak. So you've got to educate yourself from the actual sources that will give you real information. Be persistently vocal. That's another thing I say. You know, notice the difference between the way Costa Rica presented its position at that Codex meeting I told you about and the way I did. I'm not trying to pat myself on the back. I'm just saying I was persistently vocal. Costa Rica wasn't. Had I been like Costa Rica, I guarantee you the NRVs would have advanced. So when you're confronting this situation, you need to do the same thing. Don't just write an email, then write a letter, then pick up the phone, then go down and visit your representative or whomever you're trying to influence. Take your friends and family with you and take some action. And especially if you're at home, internet blogs and the like, and you see people pushing forth false information, don't hesitate to jump in there and counter that with your own reply to that. So challenge, 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 and join with others to act together. And I have to commend those of you who have already joined NHF Ireland. We really appreciate your support, because we're going to launch a campaign, and there will be others. I think Walter Graham will speak soon after I about this fluoride campaign that we'll launch and what he's done. And I think you'll find it hugely interesting. But we're going to focus on one campaign here, not diffuse our energy and attention across a wide span of things, and get water fluoridation removed from Irish waters. Walter Graham was successful in doing that in Northern Ireland, and we think we can repeat that success here. So it's important after the talk, when there's a break, to go back and sign up if you want to help us with that. Never doubt, in that vein, by the way, what Margaret Mead said here, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful and committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever did. The American Revolution was started and won by less than 10% of the population. Now, this is a quote I give every time, and it's by the worst US president you can ever imagine, even worse than the current last two or three. Lyndon Johnson, who was probably involved perhaps in the assassination of John F. Kennedy, in my opinion, but in any event, he did say one good thing, and he says, "What convinces is conviction. Believe in the argument you're advancing. If you don't, you're as good as dead. The other person will sense that something isn't there, and no chain of reasoning, no matter how logical or elegant or brilliant, will win your case for you." So I want to say to you that when I am at the Codex meetings, I speak in a very different way than most of the other delegates. They're just bureaucrats doing their job. You know, 9 to 5, they don't necessarily believe in what they're talking about. But when I do it because I believe in health freedom. I believe in the right of the consumer to make his or her own choice as to what they want to eat. And so I'm speaking from the heart, and it's important when you approach people that you do that too. There's a lot of energy, there's a lot of force from that you won't get otherwise. So it's incredibly important to take that approach. This, you already saw the video, so I won't spend time on this. We have a lobbyist in Congress. I guarantee you we don't pay him $6 million a day. And we do ads. This was actually done in England, and we had this ad running for a while. Letters to various food regulatory agencies like this one in the UK. How many of you know this gentleman? He was it's Ron Paul, for those of you who don't. He should have been the President of the United States, but of course the powers that be kept him from achieving that. He was the recipient of our NHF Health Freedom Award, which is why he's featured here, and is one of the good guys advancing health freedom in the US and indirectly at least throughout the world. Book that's available in the back, especially if you join NHF. In fact, it's a wash on the cost if you join us. Codex Alimentarius, Global Food Imperialism. Summary, don't trust the government for solutions. If you want to stay alive, you've got to look to yourself and your own instincts. Don't trust the mass media for information. Look to the independent press. Certainly don't trust medicine for health. And do work with NHF Ireland. Please go see, in fact, Sarah Carney, Dave Massey, Simon Murphy, and the others are around here, and go up to them. And I know some of you already have, and I appreciate that, but definitely contact them. In fact, you know, my ability to talk and oppose the NRV adoption at the Dusseldorf meeting was directly due to the Irish group, especially Dave Massey, who contributed a lot of money so that I could go there. Otherwise, I would have been sitting at home on the laptop. So it's not just people like me who are in the front lines, it's the people behind who are actually supporting us. Otherwise, without Ireland, without the Irish group, it wouldn't have happened. That victory wouldn't have happened in Dusseldorf. So they deserve probably far more credit than I do because they put me there. Wherever Dave is and the others. Thank you, because they definitely deserve that round of applause. And go to our website and www.thenhf.com. You can click on various buttons there. You can also sign up online if you like. We couldn't get NHF, so we got the NHF, so you will find it that way. Or you can spell out the name and put .org at the end. And finally, how do you want to be remembered? You know, you can have your job, your family, your vacations and the like, but how do you really want to be remembered? And this is the way I am. I'd rather make a difference in the world than be rich or any of those things. So I take the motto that success is a series of small steps, and I do small steps to arrive at the goal. And with that in mind, I remember what Benjamin Franklin said: a long life may not be good enough, but a good life is long enough. And I leave you with that thought. Thank you.